Hi everyone, Tony Tonkin here from Child Protection Party. Now, I just need to say that in preparation for this particular video and the subject, which is child protection, really about kidnapping and trafficking kids, and I must confess, to be honest with you, I've sat here for probably a couple of hours with this set up, with my finger over the button, because I just press one button and away she goes. And because I wasn't sure in my own mind how I can explain this. And it all came about because is the child protection system into trafficking children is really the question that I'm asking. And it's kind of, I put it to someone else earlier and I said, well, we need to make it as a statement as opposed to a question. Because I'll tell you how this happened. I watched a movie last night on Netflix called Who I Am a Child. Oh, I Am a Child. And it was a movie it was filmed in South Africa, and it was about child trafficking. And it's a horrific thing to watch. It's a really well-made movie. I suggest people watch it if you've got Netflix. And I was thinking, is child protection in some way remotely? It's not like this is horrific stuff, the way that kids were sold and abused and stuff, but is child protection system all that different in some ways to the trafficking of children? And when I looked up the definition, which I'm just going to have to refer to here, said trafficking of children is a form of human trafficking and is defined by the United Nations as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harbouring and or receipt, kidnapping of a child for the purpose of slavery, forced labour and exploitation. Well, clearly some of those things do not apply to what I'm saying. But do we traffic, right? So this is the issue for me. Firstly, it's the language. A lot of people would find this sort of language offensive, particularly if you work in the area. And I think it's about time we started to elaborate on the language that could be used to describe the terrible processes that take place that are about kidnapping and trafficking children. And when I was reflecting on this, I was thinking, do we kidnap kids? And I couldn't help but think of a number of cases that I know, many, where parents, biological families, do not get to see their kids. I know a number of cases where they don't get to see their kids at all. Now, in my view, that's kidnapping. So where an organisation or whatever prevents someone from seeing their children, then that is kidnapping these kids. So that's another word I think we could use to start to describe what it is that the child protection system does. I know that there are some people out there that have already used that word, that's fine, but I'm saying that kidnapping is the process of removing a child. So it's about removing vulnerable people away from the people that they love and cherish the most. So if I was to go out there and kidnap a whole host of kids or whatever and just take them away, clearly that's illegal because I haven't got the authority to do that. But if the department does it, it's legalised. So legalised kidnapping is certainly something which does take place within our community, and we don't call it for what it is. So if we're taking a vulnerable kid away from their family and they haven't got the choice as to whether they could see this family or not, simply because the department makes that decision, that is no different from someone kidnapping a child, taking them away, and in most cases, abusing them, holding them for ransom, whatever the case may be. It is exactly the same thing. It's just that, in this case, it is legalised because we give permission for the department to take away children and for them not to be returned to their biological family. And in many cases, as I've said many times before, our estimate is between 50 and 65% of children could be returned back to their families if the department chose not to kidnap them in the way that they do. And they do it legally by putting in an order through to the child's age of 18, ensuring that that child will not have the opportunity to see their family again. So do we traffic, though? Well, kidnapping we do. Kidnapping is what legalised kidnapping certainly takes place in our society. But do we traffic? And I've spent some time today thinking about this word about trafficking. And the reality is we do. In fact, we all traffic in something. You know, I'm an accredited mental health social worker, so I guess I traffic in people's mental well-being or their not so well-being. We all traffic in something. My goal is to be able to help people to get better. My goal isn't to keep people locked into that program until I've made as much money as I can. That's not what I do. I leave that up to psychiatrists to do that. But we can traffic in something. We can have a focus in some particular area. But the trafficking of children is detrimental primarily to their health. So how does the government traffic in children? That's the question. Well, everybody has an investment. The amount of money spent on child protection in Australia is about $5.8 billion. There are a lot of people that are invested in this. So this is a system which focuses on the most vulnerable people in our society. Children, families from poor backgrounds, families where there's issues like domestic violence, mental health and drug use or homelessness. So these are areas which are the focus. So it's vulnerable areas. Now, when I was watching this movie last night, it wasn't the rich kids in Africa or the rich families that are having their kids removed. It was the kids on the street. It was the kids where families were struggling in order just to get food on the table. It was families that were living in squalor. These were the families in which these kids were taken from, right? Now, when I relate that to what we do in our society, we do exactly the same thing. We're trafficking in children that come from the most vulnerable families that you can imagine and that have gotten, and this is the other thing with the movie I watched, is that they have no way of fighting back. There's one woman in this video who did choose a way to fight back from her own abuse, which was horrific in itself. But people don't normally have a way of fighting back if you come from a vulnerable family. So we're trafficking in this incredible, vulnerable group of people, their children, and they don't have a way of fighting back. Now, that is trafficking, whichever way you look at it. And it's a word I'd like to think that we used more often to describe what the department is doing. And the other thing is, who benefits from all of this? Well, as I said, it's a $5.8 billion industry here in Australia at the moment and increasing exponentially because more and more kids are being removed from their homes. So the people that are benefiting, the traffickers, are those people who earn their income from the removal of children. And the organisations that are most accountable in this area happen to be non-government organisations. I won't mention them by name. We know who they are. If your kids are in care, you'll know who is looking after them. It probably isn't a state-based organisation. It's probably an NGO of some description. Now, it's like if we compare, so a criminal enterprise. The removal of children in a criminal enterprise is about selling these children to earn an income for that enterprise. That is horrific. We all think it's horrific. If you see anything about the enslavement of children, and one of the statistics that came out at the end of this movie I was watching is that they were saying that between 500 and 700,000 children go missing that are sold into slavery or that are abused and sold into some other form of enslavement. And that figure to me is horrific, and particularly when we see the sort of things that these kids go through and how they're popped onto planes and sent to other parts of the world. It's horrific. Women and children go through this, the most vulnerable people in our community. experience this. But who benefits? Organisations who have got access to these children and who've set up a structure in order to house, accommodate, and have these kids so-called cared for, they're the organisations that are benefiting. They are kind of like, if you look at the other side of the scale, they're kind of like the criminal enterprise that sits there benefiting from these kids. Do they really want these children to be back with their parents? Do they really want to work at ensuring that these kids are returned back? When you look at the statistics, the amount of money spent on housing, accommodating, caring for these kids, compared to the amount of money that is spent on reunification programs or early intervention programs in particular, it is minuscule. So that the money to house is far greater than the money to preserve those kids with their biological families. That is trafficking. When people are gaining from that enterprise, such as NGOs and so on, and the government to some extent as well, then they are trafficking in children. And it's about time we started to talk about this in a realistic and in a way, I guess, which confronts agencies, which confronts the problem for what it really is. And I'm of the belief that sometimes we just need to change our language in order to make people stand up and take notice of what it is that we have to say. That it's about time we made a choice about how to describe actually what's happening to our kids. They're either being kidnapped or they're being trafficked by a government and by NGOs for their benefit. If you've got any thoughts in relation to this, I haven't had a chance, haven't had all that many people go online. So many children were trafficked and end up. Simi, thanks for that, Simi. Allow people that don't meet the criteria to adopt. Thanks, Cindy. One of the other areas which I thought was interesting was the area of adoption. Children may also be trafficked for the purpose of adoption was one of the other quotes that I came across here. And I think that's the other area too that we need to consider is that as adoption laws change, we will find that there are more and more children placed into care facilities, whether it be foster care or resi care, with the notion that these children eventually will be adopted out. So our system will succumb, and is succumbing, to notions around adoption and the feeding out of children, trafficking of children into adoption services, so that those people can start to make the money that they want as well. I remember some years ago I had a wonderful woman contact me and talk to me about what the type of money that people make from adoption. Now, I didn't believe her. Adoption wasn't a big thing in South Australia, so I didn't bother all that much with it. But I did take some time to look up the statistics and and she had this certain agency, which I won't name, but is well known, and they provide adoption services. And I worked out that when we add up all the services that they offer, that organisation for each adoption was earning about $44,000. So for every 10 children, that is $440,000 that they were making. So we double that, triple that, whatever. You can see how eventually this is going to become big business for that organisation. Now that is trafficking. When they're trafficking in children at that level because they know that they're the ones that are going to benefit from that, then that is wrong. Now the issue for me is that I don't think that many social workers, managers, supervisors, chief executives and ministers think of what they're doing as trafficking in children. I think that to some extent they believe that they're doing the right thing to keep kids safe. And we have to admit that there are families out there where the kids should not be housed because they're horrific. You know, there is abuse, there's domestic violence, there's a whole lot of other stuff happening, and kids should not be in those homes where that is occurring. But we also know that there are lots and lots of parents out there who are more than capable of looking after their kids and keeping them safe. So we need to be asking the question is, why is it that governments will insist on having these children in long-term care when it is possible to have them returned back to their parents? I was speaking to a beautiful young woman today who's got 3 young kids and they're in long-term care, and there is no reason whatsoever why this woman could not have these kids back in her care. Zilch. No reason. And the government, the department, does not offer her a reason as to why they're in care at this particular point, and they're going for a GOM 18 order on all these kids. So they're going to destroy their lives. Why? Because, number one, I guess they believe that there are issues that this woman has, which clearly she doesn't, and they want to believe that because that supports their other beliefs about their belief that they're protecting this child. So they don't believe that it's in the child's best interest to be with his mum. They believe it's in the children's best interest to be with, potentially, in this case, a family that is abusive. So why is that so? Because I think there's an underlying unconscious belief that this is the way they maintain their jobs. That if they were to say, like, let's say they're going to return just 50% of all the kids back to their biological families. In their minds, they're thinking, well, if I do that, then I'm just going to find myself without a job. You know, chief executives are going to be sacked. You know, NGOs are going to find that they just haven't got the volume of money rolling into their organisations that they would like to satisfy their boards. So at the end of the day, as is the case with trafficking, criminal trafficking, which in itself is horrific, we also have legalised trafficking on the other side, but the motivations are the same. At the end of the day, this is about organisations, people. It's about people having the income that they want to satisfy their own needs. That's really what it's about. So I just want us to think about, are we allowing the kidnapping to happen because we're not calling it out for what it is? Because our kids are being kidnapped, particularly when they can't see their biological families. That's just wrong at every level. And then we've got the trafficking of children, which is the shunting children out so that organisations and individuals within those organisations can receive the profits from the services or from governments for having these kids in long-term care. So do we legalise it? Is it legalised trafficking? Yes, it is. Is it legalised kidnapping? Yes, it is. So I'd be really interested in any of the thoughts that any of you have, and some people have. Constitutional rights regards to children being removed. So Grant has put up something here on Facebook which might be worth having a look at. And Rebecca, thanks for asking how I am. I appreciate that as well. And if you could all please, this is on YouTube as well. If you're on YouTube, please share this particular video and like it and ring the bell. And if you're on Facebook, could you please share it as well? Thanks everybody for being with me. Take care of yourself, look after everybody else around you, and be safe.